So the case that we chose to look into was U.S. versus Flute, and this is a case citation under the title. So for the facts of the case, Samantha Flute was indicted with involuntary manslaughter of her own child. Baby boy Flute was born on August 19th of 2016, and he died just 4 hours after giving birth. A few hours before giving birth, Samantha Flute ingested 3 times her prescribed dosage of anxiety medication, cough syrup, and she also snorted pain medication that was laced with cocaine. So Flute filed for a motion with the United States District Court for the District of South Dakota. She was arguing to dismiss the indictment on the grounds that the charged offense did not cover her other conduct, and the district court did grant this motion. Flute argued that baby boy Flute should not be considered a human being under the law in this scenario, and that the federal manslaughter statute does not apply to a mother's conduct with respect to her unborn child.
So there were 2 main issues in this case. First, the court had to determine whether baby boy Flute was protected under the manslaughter statute. Since the definition of a human being has been changed over the course of history, the court needed to determine if, in this scenario, given the facts, baby boy Flute really was considered a human being. They decided, since the federal murder statute made it clear that infants who are born alive and killed due to fetal injuries are considered human beings, baby boy Flute was also considered a human being, and he was therefore a protected class in the situation. The United States was able to justify the charge of manslaughter against Flute, even though her negligent actions occurred while baby boy Flute was still in utero and had not been born yet. The second issue was determining whether Flute could be charged with manslaughter based on her negligent behavior during pregnancy that resulted in the death of her own child. The district court decided to dismiss Flute's case and indictment because they claimed that pregnant mothers cannot be prosecuted for their acts towards their fetuses while pregnant on the basis that Flute was not a third party that committed this crime. And the district court justified this decision by referring heavily to the common law definitions of murder and manslaughter while making this decision.
So for the district court rulings, the district court dismissed Flute's indictment on the grounds that the federal manslaughter statute does not apply to pregnant mothers and their actions that affect their unborn babies. The district court did rule that baby boy Flute is considered a human being under the law, and that led to the plaintiff in this case, which was the United States, to file another appeal, and the case was brought to the United States Courts of Appeals for the Eighth Circuit.
So the Court of Appeals agreed that baby boy Flute is considered a human being in this situation, but they claimed that it was a mistake for the district court to rule that Flute could not be charged with manslaughter based on her actions against her fetus while she was pregnant. They wrote that there's no applicable exception for conduct of a mother that causes injuries sustained in utero and resulting in death after birth exists. So the Court of Appeals reversed the district court's opinion and instructed the United States to reinstate Flute's indictment. I found this case interesting because I thought it was odd that a major point of contention was whether or not baby boy Flute was considered a human being under the law. A couple of years ago where I live, a pregnant woman was murdered by her boyfriend, and he was charged with double homicide, even though it was just a fetus since the woman was still pregnant. So I thought it was interesting that in this case, they had to debate whether baby boy Flute was a human, even though he was already born, just because his injuries were sustained in utero. Ultimately, I agree with the Court of Appeals because I think Samantha Flute should be held accountable for her actions. I understand why the district court dismissed her indictment, but at the end of the day, their reasoning for dismissing the indictment was taken way out of context. So I think the Court of Appeals did the right thing by reinstating her indictment.
So to me, I thought this case was extremely intriguing because I've never heard of a case where a mother had tried to kill her baby this close to birth. The issue in this case of whether or not baby boy Flute was considered a human under the law at the time he was killed can be seen as similar to the argument of abortion and asks the question, at what point is an unborn fetus considered a human being? Although when it comes to the argument of abortion, there are two sides being argued. I do think that in the case of Flute, it's hard to justify the actions of the mother because the baby was born alive but was ended up dying due to her negligent actions. I definitely agree with the final decision from the Court of Appeals that Samantha Flute should be charged with the killing of her child. I don't particularly agree with why the district court's decision to dismiss her indictment because it was based on the premise that a pregnant mother can't be prosecuted for their actions against their fetus. That personally just doesn't make sense to me because in this context, the mother was extremely negligent at like almost to the point of intention. So I believe that she should be held responsible for the death of her child. Samantha Flute had carried her child to almost full term, which would lead me to believe that she knew taking that extensive amount of medicine would be fatal to the baby, and she still took that much anyways. I agree that she should not be protected under the category and that baby boy Flute was still considered human as he died after birth. Overall, I agree with the Court of Appeals and her charge of manslaughter due to her negligence. So for what's next in the case, this case is still currently ongoing. And so unless the defendant, which is Flute, seeks a Supreme Court review and that is granted, trial court will reinstate the indictment and another trial will take place. This trial will be deciding whether by exceeding Flute's prescribed prescription drugs and ingesting cocaine, whether that makes her sufficiently negligent and whether that caused the death of the child. And this also leads to issues for Congress. And so, since this case involves statutes designed to provide federal protection for unborn children, Congress may wish to reevaluate the extent to which women may be prosecuted for negligent conduct that affects their unborn child who are then born alive. So, this case kind of led to Congress um, making more laws about that. So, that was.